one of the hardest men to get a hold of sometimes, and and get like a LinkedIn connect. Yes, we got it here. We'll have we can get it. And we're gonna widen out the shot. Get everybody in.
Come on in.
We got it. Just
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm Robert Scoble. I wrote 2 books on spatial computing. I was Apple's first child laborer, which is a true story. I learned how to solder on Apple II motherboards a long time ago. It's real exciting about this world that we're going into. We're going to try to put a button, a bow on this conference and send everybody home. That's one goal. Number 2 goal is to give you some homework. Created a list of 4,600 AI companies on x.com. So if you go to my profile and click view lists, you'll find I've categorized them and put them all into buckets. We're going to talk about the holodeck. So Dylan, who runs an R&D group at Unity, and I have been doing this thing every night about the holodeck and talking about how everything around us is volumetric pixels, right? You got the device that does it on your head. That when you put that on at the Apple Store, you're not seeing the Apple Store. You think you're seeing the Apple Store. You're seeing volumetric pixels, a digital twin of the Apple Store, right? And it's a really extraordinary camera, by the way. So thanks for the tools that you're giving us. Yeah. Let's go into it. We're about to get, in the next 18 months, we're going to see a huge amount of change for human beings. We're getting glasses that can create voxels, sort of like that, but lighter and hopefully cheaper.
That's exactly.
That thing hurts me. I didn't bring it. I didn't bring mine today because it's like you put it on, it's like it's something. Yeah, it's heavy. It's lighter than my first TV camera though, which was about this big and cost $120
So just
grand.
imagine this is the first generation. What's going to happen in the future? You
know? Yeah. We're about to get humanoid robots that are going to walk around this holodeck, which is really crazy because it can see the floor. The founder of Sync Reality scanned my house on an iPhone and ran virtual beings. He ran a fashion show in my house where the models were walking on my real floor, right? And we can stop the show at any time and buy the clothes. It's like, whoa, there's some weird shit coming. Right? What else are we gonna get? We're about to get automatic shopping, right? We had this different conference, right? This is all about entertainment and media, but we're getting new cameras. So the Insta360 camera company came to my house. Long story short, I lived right next to GoPro's headquarters. I could walk over there, and so I got to know them quite well. And Insta360 from China came to my house and showed me their first AI camera, which uses AI to steady the ball of pixels around you, right? That does even more. Tell us what that does as a camera.
Yeah.
Because that's a special camera.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really interesting when you start thinking about even the development of cameras like Canon, Nikon, all these different camera companies, and what actually is coming out as the new medium of experiencing these like new experiences, right? I think Apple is in a very, very unique position because we all already have iPhones, and that's why they're so big on their marketing of like, you can literally make a film with your iPhone camera lenses because take my iPhone out right now. If you guys can see, they literally have like 3 different lenses already on your iPhone. And this is like all what you're talking about, the 360, the spatial, the normal Canon, all in one phone device. And I think that that's very interesting what they're trying to do. And you can only imagine even these lenses on this device. They actually don't allow developers to have access to all the cameras and because spatial computing is a very complex where you need to know everything what's happening in your environment. Unfortunately, you can't do that yet, and hopefully they allow us to do more with the camera vision. But the spatial videos and how those are done is the farther the 2 lenses are apart, the more depth you can get. And so these lenses are like here and here, I think, if you can see them, I can't really see.
Yeah, there's like 6 cameras on the front of that.
Yes, but you don't have access to all of them. You only have access really to these two. Um, and this one is very small. This one is smaller, but this one is wider, so you get more depth, basically. So,
It's really, it has some Israeli targeting in the camera. There's a little plus right in the middle of the frame when I'm shooting video.
yes, yes.
And if I move off of you, let's say I put the first plus on you and move off, there's a second plus. If I keep the pluses together, it really steadies the whole experience around you. Right?
Yes, 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 exactly. Yeah.
It's crazy. We're heading into a new world where we can capture experiences and bring in the photographer uh, point of view. We're about to be able to capture things in 3D in a very mind-blowing way, where soon we're going to be able to walk around things that you capture, right? Maybe start with you. Yeah. What is this new world that's coming? Because we're about to get glasses that people can view these things at home. They're coming. I just saw them at the Display Week show last week ago. Very, very small, lightweight glasses with very small cameras, much smaller than that, but does the same thing. What does this mean to you as a photographer?
Yeah, when the Meta Ray-Bans came out, I snatched them. And the reason why is, I spoke about my photography background, but I honestly had to stop taking photos for a while because I sustained like some injuries and I couldn't really carry around like a heavy camera anymore. Right? Look, they're huge, 600 millimeter lenses for sports. They're taller than me. They're bigger than me. Um, and really started to use just my iPhone more, right? But I missed, you know, being able to take pictures with a camera and various hardware. And also actually holding up like a camera or a phone, I felt like not that involved with what was happening around me and the people around me. So that is definitely something I personally am excited about because being able to just like click the button on my Meta Ray-Bans or Vision Pro, I mean Vision Pro is a little more stocky, but like um, you're able to interact with your environment without that interfering with your experience. And then from that point of view, I'm excited with what's coming there, even with what that means for photography, because photography now it's a still image, and there's still beauty in that. There's still a lot of appreciation we should have for that medium and for photographers in general, who are worried if photography is a dying industry. But with spatial 3D and being able to experience photos in real life, then isn't that what photographers want in the first place, right? To capture life and what's around you.
One photo of, let's say, Yosemite National Park, of, let's say, Half Dome in Yosemite, can create an entire world. One photo. We're seeing AI systems now coming along where you feed that photo to an AI and it builds a 3D scene out of that one photo and more. What is this world set up, Denise? Because you're working with people who are building the standards for how this world is going to interact with not just our glasses, our autonomous cars, our robots, right? That are all going to use the same kind of system.
Yeah, and it's interesting because to me it's really going to change how we view human existence, and what I mean by that is this technology is going to affect us on an individual level, just for our own environments and smart technologies within our environments and making our lives easier, and it's going to completely change industries. We just take media. Here we're talking a lot about the film industry. If you look at like the old models of the film industry, the film itself, Disney would use it like as an advertisement and then launch merchandise around it, launch video games around it. But now, there are going to be metaverses around these films, and it's like the precursor to this is now the experience you can jump in and out of. The thing is it's also going to enable us to have these virtual assets that go with us everywhere, right? We're not just stuck in a siloed metaverse, and whatever assets we acquire in there have to stay within that world because it's all programmed within that world. We're able to jump from this experience into this experience into this experience and take everything with us. It becomes a part of our identity that goes with us in every, you know, in every form of existence that we have in these spaces. And then when you think of the fact that what this technology is going to do in enabling us to run simulations, because we have now digital twins of everything. So when you think of, you know, the way smart cities need to work, you know, by combining different parts of their infrastructure and then optimizing for the sustainability of the citizens, for inclusivity, for, you know, different goals within that kind of a space to really optimize the way we get to live as humans. And even on a planetary level, solving big problems like climate change and, you know, how we grow our food and just, you know, division of resources and new ways to, you know, expand the resources that are available. It's pretty mind-blowing.
We're about to get well. Edward Saatchi showed me he won an Oscar for his work that he calls Wolves in the Walls. He runs a VR studio, and he took me into Wolves in the Walls. Put me in VR, sort of like with a headset like that, and I was in his experience, and this little girl was drawn on her walls, and then she came over to me and she handed me a flashlight. And I took it from her and I shone it in her eyes. Keep in mind, she's a virtual thing in an entertainment product that we used to call a movie, right? We have to have new words for some of these new experiences. That just blew me away because it showed me that entertainment is about to change. He said, the problem with that is it cost $15 million to build that. We're about to get tools that are going to make that possible for a lot cheaper, but it brings maybe some new problems that we have to worry about. What are you thinking of this new world? How do you look at the last 2 days and what we have to do in the next 18 months?
100%. So for quick context, I've been an AI engineer for 12 years, ex-Microsoft, ex-Google. Google, I created 2 research teams of my own. One of them was the skin tone team, which taught AI how to see black and brown skin tones. And now I'm at UC Berkeley, where I'm building the first ever AI policy lab. And so I think what we're doing right now is we're sort of throwing things, like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And to your point, what ends up happening with any new technology is as we launch something new problems pop up. And so in this space, you know, what Denise was mentioning about the digital twins, you see wonderful examples of that already happening. So USC, University of Southern California, uses motion capture suits to create digital twins of all of their athletes. So when an athlete has an injury, they simulate different physical training and physical therapy programs to help them get back on board. When you look in the media and entertainment space, there's a startup based out of LA that creates a sort of a digital twin of your proposed event space so you can completely virtually design it and experience it before you go there. So there are these use cases that can be really helpful across a number of domains, but the potential for abuse of those systems is something that we shouldn't ignore. Right. And I believe, Eliza, you brought up a stat earlier that it was like, hey, all this generative AI to help us make content is also being used to like generate content we don't want generated, right? Like deep fake porn. And so with these virtual environments and worlds, as we're modeling things like maybe the best way to create a new movie studio that's sustainable and like won't mess with the flow of traffic of a city, what is the potential for abuse of that technology for someone to take it and maybe model out the house that they want to rob or the bank that they want to steal from? Also, what is the potential to, you know, take a digital twin of a person and learn how to better manipulate their health or their conditions, or enable folks who don't have the best intentions when using these systems? So I think that in AI in general, and we're starting to work this out with Europe creating the AI Act, but in general, we need to make sure that as we put this new technology out, we have better boundaries around it. This is not something unique to AI. So for example, it wasn't until 2011 that automobile manufacturers required that their safety systems be tested with female-bodied crash test dummies. So up until that point, women were 60% more likely to be injured or to die in a car accident. And vehicles have been around for hundreds of, 100 and something years at that point. And so regulation is not to slow innovation, it's to put boundaries to prevent those bad actors from being able to abuse these systems so that we can fully activate this technology without sort of harming ourselves in the process.
So, one thing I would love to express here is that that's one of the beautiful things about this new protocol, is that security is first and foremost and baked into the protocol. So, if you think of what we're doing with all this emerging tech right now, we're trying to put it in the most unsecured environment, which is the World Wide Web. And the problem with the World Wide Web is that all of the transactions are taking place under the umbrella of the web domain and whatever centralized authority owns that domain, right? So right now, permissions, you're either saying yes or no. Like, yes, you can use all my data, or no, and then I won't be using your system. With the Spatial Web protocol, now everything in every space and all spaces become domains, and therefore they're programmable. So permissions are at every touch point. Credentials can be programmed in at every touch point. Any amount of data can be guardrailed. And so, the founders of Versus, so Versus, they made the protocol, but they donated it to the public because nobody can own the internet. But what they've done is they've built the first interface that the public will get to interface with this new extension of the internet. And when they were approaching, okay, what do we need to do with this protocol? They were like, well, we need to solve the three big problems of the World Wide Web: hacking, tracking, and faking. And so security was first and foremost in, the building of this protocol. So I think once we do shift into this space, which the public is going to gain access to this at the end of this year. So it's coming very quickly. They're opening up their platform to the wider developer community at the end of June, So once we start getting access to this, I think a lot of these problems and a lot of the fears that we have around AI, we're gonna see they're gonna be alleviated a little bit, because we're gonna see that we're in a much more secure environment. And the AI, the active inference AI that's enabled across the network, um, it operates in the same manner as biological intelligence, and it actually can self-report. It can report on how it's coming to its conclusions, decision making, all of that. And it's also programmable. So through HSML, hyperspace modeling language, you can take human laws and human guidelines and make them understandable for the AI, so the AI can understand them and abide by them in real time. So there's a level of human machine cooperation that's right around the corner that we aren't experiencing right now.
In 3 years, when we have these classes on, there's going to be a virtual being in the room around us, or something we talk to. Hey, Siri, right?
Right. I mean,
Or
but
hey, ChatGPT.
think about it. With
right?
the expansion of the internet, just the size and the data and everything, we're going to need those agents to help us parse all that data.
But we already are getting multimodal models where we can take a picture of this table and it can see, oh, there's 3 water bottles on a table, and it might even tell us the brand of the table if it's really good, right? We're about to head into a world where we're going to give everything to an AI, everything, the sex toys in our drawers, everything. And people are like, what? Yeah, you're going to have a humanoid robot in your house cleaning your toilet soon. That's going to see things, capture things, know things about you that you might not be comfortable with an AI, with a company like a Tesla or a
Right.
Apple or a Google knowing about you, right? This leads to a whole bunch of new privacy problems, doesn't it?
100%. And I think that there are a couple of levers that we have to pull collectively. Right now, this AI thing is happening in front of us, but it's up to us to actively shape what it looks like in the future. We can't just leave it up to the Elon Musks and to the Mark Zuckerbergs and to the Sam Altmans of the world to decide a future that our descendants are going to have to live in. I think it's a collective responsibility. So when we talk about that privacy piece, I mean, a few few months ago, everyone was up in arms about whether or not TikTok was going to be banned. And I think there was a piece of news that came out that we might have skipped over, and it was the introduction of a new privacy bill in the United States that meant that any piece of data that was collected about you that could either individually or in collection with other parts of data become PII, or personally identifiable information, would require your explicit consent to be able to give to the company. And if the company wanted to share or transfer that data to any third party for any reason, that would also require your explicit consent. And that bill was introduced into the House, and it's kind of sitting in the committee because there wasn't as much public pressure for that bill as there was around the TikTok ban. And so I think that, again, each of us collectively have a responsibility to make sure laws like that are passed. The federal government has some challenges depending on who is the administration and which way they politically sway, but that doesn't stop you from getting laws like that passed in your city and in your state. And another privacy consideration and an overall sort of challenge to the scalability of AI, right? Like making your model that you might build here work well in different regions around the world, is that we have to think about the imbalance in who has access to the internet, whose data is going to go into those models, right? Because right now, there's a whole significant chunk of the world that is just coming online, that's just now getting access to the internet. And the way that they engage with the internet and with these kinds of technologies is fundamentally different than the way that we, the creators of the internet, have been engaging with it for the past 20 some odd years. So when we're building these models to work, or even these AIs that are going to go around and clean people's houses, we have to ask, well, who can afford that? Who can't? What are some of the challenges going to be if it's only trained on, rich people's houses that are like massive? You have a 600 square foot bathroom versus someone who lives in a 600 square foot studio. How are we going to make sure that there's balance and representation in that data from the diversity of the lived experiences and the lived realities we expect them to operate in?
I'd like to add something actually. This may be like more of a hot take on privacy and stuff, but I feel like if I had to give all my data to Netflix to let me know what I want to watch, I'm gonna do that. Because like I spend so much time doing stuff and like looking for stuff that I want to do. But if things already know like my data, if AI kind of knows, and they can help me better like move, make decisions. I'm gonna do
a lot freakier than that. Hear me out. I'm patient number one with a psychiatrist who's using ChatGPT to listen to her therapy sessions.
But I think,
and I posted the notes in 30. Well, no, they stripped off personal identifiable information to take notes. I posted my notes on x.com so you can see what it does. In 30 minutes, it nailed all my mental illnesses and took a lot of detail. Like if I comment, oh, nice shirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
A nice t-shirt. It put that in the notes. It's really good at listening to us.
Exactly. And I think like
and figuring out who we are.
Yes, exactly.
And therefore this industry is going to personalize really fucking amazingly because who you are, right?
I think to just add to that, I think humans and like we're not that different as we think we are, right? So it's like, what are we really protecting? Like, are we secretive about, do we do something wrong? Do we do something bad? But I feel like for the general population, the general people, we've all lived very similar lives to get to the points that we're at, and it's not anything new under the sun. So if you can have all my data to help me, do stuff, then I don't care.
Go ahead.
So I just want to add to that and to your comment about really stripped off all the identifiable information, and that's a really important thing. And one thing that the Spatial Web protocol enables, because we're moving from the ideal was a decentralized internet, but that's impossible when all the information is transacting under the umbrella of a centralized organization. So when you're sitting there saying ChatGPT and we're going, oh, that's the O. But
and she said it's going to certainly malpractice not to use it. It caught some stuff with her patients over time that she missed.
Well, so what's interesting about the Spatial Web protocol, though, is it enables zero trust architecture because it's distributed ledger technology. So then you really do, in the same way blockchain works by confirmation of various nodes, It's the same thing. These AIs will be aware of things and be able to confirm identities and different things without revealing the personal information about the person. So right now, you have to go. You want to go walk into a bar, you have to show your ID. That's some sensitive information you're just showing to a stranger, and you shouldn't have to do that. And within the spatial web, you won't, because there will be confirmations within the network that already know. And to your point, that's okay. And to your point of like, it's not revealing anything about me to anybody I don't want to know.
We're not sure.
I
I posted my notes on X.com, which just blew it wide open.
And see, that's the thing, is that it will become a value exchange system. So we will still trade data, but we'll get something for it.
I love your example of just the psychiatric office. It reminds me too. I mean, I found out recently, like it was back in the '60s when the first chatbot was invented. And I mean, ironically, it was named Eliza or ELIZA. Um, but really, a primary use case that was used for initially was as a therapist, right? And that was what it was meant for. And to your point, like I think what so many people are excited about for AI, whether they know that they want this or not, is to be known, right? It's a companion. And I feel like even with regulators don't know what laws they're going to write till they're faced with real life use cases, right? And that's how laws are subject to change. So just to come back to the basics, yeah, like what are we going to be eventually willing to forego because this AI is going to know us so well.
If you ask ChatGPT, give me 10 restaurants near Draper University, it does, and it's pretty good because it read a lot of data to do that. But if you tell it your food preferences, your allergies, I'm a vegan, whatever, the list gets way better, right?
Yeah.
That's your personal information. You just get to the AI to give a better answer. So I thought your point was right on point.
And back to like even what Denise was saying, I think AI in itself, like as a developer, I know exactly what AI is. It's just a computer program. It's a system that was built the same way we built the system of America, right? The only thing that's wrong with America and systems are the people in those systems. So like I would rather trust a system that's well built, that's verified, versus trusting a person that can always change and do something different, right? So if that makes sense.
So I love your guys' points about the fact that we love trading off data for convenience, right? And I think that when we're looking at apps, we have to take a more intelligent approach. Like the risk that Netflix recommends a movie I don't want to watch, or Spotify recommends a song I don't like, the harm that would come from that is very minimal. So I'm more willing to give my data over to that. But the idea that my AI psychiatrist or psychologist would give me the wrong mental illness diagnosis and the potential for harm there is much different. So the level to which we put boundaries or guardrails around these systems, I personally think should be based on the potential for. So when we talked about the ChatGPT thing, the reason I made that is not necessarily because it's owned by a private company, but because large language models in and of themselves are parrots, right? They're not intelligent systems. What they do is they take your prompt, they convert it to a token, which is a mathematical representation of that text, and then they predict and guess essentially what words it should respond with, which is why they hallucinate, where they make things up that aren't real because it doesn't necessarily actually understand what it's saying. It's mathematically predicting based on its weights, etc. So there's always a risk of hallucination. So I wonder if all of your notes accurately represent that session or what was generated inside of it, right? And so
They were. There was one inaccuracy. It got my age wrong, which we didn't even discuss.
hallucinated your age.
It hallucinated my age, and
Mhm.
she actually had a reason that it did that. But yeah, you have to look at the notes and make sure that they're accurate. Listening, the LLMs, when it listens to, for instance, I use Limitless on my computer, which records everything I do, everything I say, everything I do, and puts it in a local file on your Macintosh, right? It's very useful. It also then transcribes everything you do. And then it summarizes everything you do. And then it writes notes to you and says, hey, you got some tasks in this meeting you just had, right? And maybe someday soon it'll be the operating system. it'll actually go and put it on your tasks, and say, hey, reminders now has 2 extra things because of this conversation you had and you recorded. Right? Whew, it's a new world. It's a new world where everything is going to be listened to, everything is going to be transcribed, everything is going to be summarized. And that's a scary world for most people to consider. But if you have a humanoid robot in your house, what do you think that thing is doing? It, they can go further than that. It has more cameras than your thing has on the front of it. It can build a plan of your house, right, and distribute that to other people. In fact, Unity has an app where they cut my kitchen in half, and the other half was your kitchen, right? And so you're in your kitchen virtually, right? This coming probably by Christmas time. If we both have the Vision Pro on, I can cut up my kitchen. Well, I just shared my kitchen with you. You just shared your kitchen with me. There's a lot of private data there. I can see the kind of cereal you eat. I can see all sorts of stuff, right? The cameras can see a lot of things about you just from the kitchen, not even talking about going into the bedroom. But this stuff is coming for people, and this whole industry is going to build entertainment properties for us because we're going to have a pair of glasses on that are going to entertain us outside, right? Walking around, going to entertain us in our living rooms, going to entertain us in our kitchens. Crazy what's coming.
Well, and the way I see all of this going too, I mean, besides the entertaining media, when you think of where marketing and advertising is going to go within this space, it's going to have to be inserted natively. We're already, even in the World Wide Web, saying, no cookies, no, I don't want you to track my stuff. I want to opt out if I can. But in this mixed reality existence, how are brands going to be able to interact with their users and their customers? And I actually see, because I see this, it's a transaction protocol that we're talking about, right? So, it's going to enable this kind of gamified experience of our existence. And, I even see a future where, there's going to be so much abundance in this space because of the data and everything and the explosion of the size of the internet and where all this technology is taking us to where we'll wake up in the morning and make our bed and then we get rewarded. We don't even realize this is happening, but maybe it's the bed manufacturer, maybe it's the sheet manufacturer, and it's loyalty programs. And, and I really feel like this could expand into a system that actually kind of sustains the population in a way, and I know that sounds very utopian, but when I think about the possibilities of this, it probably isn't,
I would like to ask you a question.
And we're way over time already. So
Okay.
make a final thought, and we're going to get out of here so these fine people we don't
That's
get dinner.
about like sustain the population.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so, I mean, we hear all these warnings of, the job loss, right? And, people are going to be out of work at no fault of their own. And for years, the governments have been talking about UBI and, they can't just let society go into chaos because automation is coming in. And I feel like there's going to be a painful transition. Like there's going to be a period of time where, we're having to transition into this space. But we're also, if you look at the reports and the projections, we're about to enter this era of abundance because of this technology. So,
I tell you, there's 4,600 companies making stuff for this new world. There's a lot coming.
Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. Is I don't think UBI. I don't think the sustaining is going to come from governments. I think the system itself is going to work into kind of this utopia kind of a system where we can, we're not all scratching and clawing for survival, but we're able to actually look outward to our communities and find other ways to find meaning as humans and add value to our society, So that's kind of where I see a lot of this technology going.
Well, thank you so much for putting up with us for a couple extra minutes. Thank you. Thanks for the great conference, Steven.
Oh, I love your input. Yeah.
Share mics for a second.
and we can just pass and get a couple burning questions.
It's your conference. If you want to run over time,
Oh, we're already we already have dead batteries. What could be worse? No, we're already about half hour over time, but we have till 8, and you know, we'll hopefully not run out of beers. Appreciate everybody sticking around. This is, can't think of a better way to wrap up the conference with Robert and forward thinking. You know, what are the next tech? What's the next tech, and what everybody's working on? You know, how do we protect our data or not? And you know, what is the future going to look like? It's definitely, we're living in interesting times, and probably the next generation will live in even more interesting times. Who knows where this is going, but it's going to be a wild ride, and I'm happy to be on this roller coaster with you guys.
Yeah.
And you
Most
guys.
definitely.
So burning questions. Let's keep them popcorn style, quick, and then burning answers. And here we go.
So with that, by the way, thank you for the great panel and your great presentation, Denise, preceding that. With your mention of universal basic income, there's been a lot of study. You know, it's generally very low amounts, and even though it's fully justified that would stimulate the economy, it's not going to happen just because of, you know, universal greed. But the concept of contributor tokens that are not in equal amounts, but for people contributing usefully on working on climate change, working on equity, working on all the things that you've all been talking about, I think is a really interesting concept to gamify. And I'm putting this question to, you know, whoever in the panel is most motivated to say something about how that might be
Grab a mic.
implemented.
Yeah. So what I think we need to kind of do is shift our concept of how we understand money and reward, right? You know, and I think that we're moving into a realm of value exchange, and to me, it's kind of like barter system used to be, right? You know, but only we had to hold our apples and oranges in order to trade them. Now it's digital tokens and digital value, right? So, you know, you have something of value to me and I have something of value to you, and we can exchange that value, you know, and it's meaningful to both of us. It may not be meaningful to someone else, but I think that's how we have to look at this next era, is more like value exchange. We're exchanging our data for value we're receiving. Right now, we don't have that opportunity with the World Wide Web. You know, it's. I think we just need to look at it more in those terms.
Agreed. And then also just want to point out that, you know, Denise mentioned there's an immense amount of wealth that's coming in. So McKinsey did a study in 2022 where they found that in the next 10 years, between now and 2045, there's going to be $500 billion of new household wealth in America alone. And so the question is, who is that going to? Well, we need UBI, right? If there's a more equitable distribution of the wealth that's going to be generated and created versus, you know, the ranking system you mentioned, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, who gets to decide what's valuable and what's not, right? Like, who gets to make that decision? And even then, when we talk about the collective, which part of the collective, who's going to be left out of that? Who gets the final say? So as long as we have equity in that process, I think that would be extremely useful. I think also making sure that we make the process of creating, designing, and implementing and using AI systems more equitable now. So there's a more equitable distribution of the household wealth that's going to be coming out. McKinsey ran a study in 2019 about what are the top 5 fields that are going to be automated by AI. And they found that in 4 of those 5 fields that Black Americans are overly represented. And that overall in the US, almost 30% of Black Americans hold a job that is like 80% likely to be automated away. And so if there are groups that are going to be disproportionately hit by this automation wave, how do we make sure that they're disproportionately prepared to more equally participate in the next level?
My question might riff off that. The Uber of my question is really ethics. Like, how do we give voice to the voiceless and to the future generations? Because 25 years at Microsoft, 15 years ago, I remember being in rooms where they're like, how do we get screen time from 7 hours a day to 8 hours a day to 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours? And I was like, whoa, right? My PhD is also in cultural transformation. So how are we taking in consideration the impact of all this abundance, so to speak? You know, is it how do we look at it from their perspective? I'm super familiar with active inference. I disagree with you transactional because we're fucked if it's transactional. It has to be relational.
Well, it will be relational between the agents with how they learn from each other and how they learn about their environment. But the protocol itself is a transaction protocol, meaning that the programming language is programming in all of the context about all of the things in all of the spaces. And instead of transactions taking place across the internet under a web domain, now they're at every touch point. So that means permissions can be baked in at every touch point, credentials, guardrails can be put in place for a secure network. So, it's all part of one ecosystem, but the agents themselves, they are relational. But they understand the interrelationship of all things in all spaces. That the network itself gives it its world model, its grounding of understanding of reality, and then it's taking in live sensory data through IoT, through cameras, through robotics, and it's measuring that data against what it knows to be true, and it's either updating its world model or it's confirming it, or um, it's uncertain, so it's going to act on the environment to gather more evidence so it can make a better decision.
It'll ask you to go take some pictures in the corner, which hasn't been imaged yet, right? Or maybe you're standing in a
Exactly, gather
line
the
at a
evidence.
nightclub, and
Yes.
it'll say, "Hey, can you take a video of the line so we know how many people are standing in line?" It could incent you to do things like that, or it could incent your humanoid robots that's standing with you to
Right.
do the same thing.
Right.
Right here.
Real quick, I want to answer the other part of your question, which is how do we elevate these voices and make sure that they're included? So my other job at Google before I created the research team was to go across all of Alphabet, all of Google, all of the research programs, projects, and Google.org AI-related funding grants, and look at those systems and assess them against Google's AI principles, which included bias, fairness, transparency. And Google didn't just have to think about fairness from a U.S. perspective because it's a global company that where we as humans don't 100% agree about what's right and wrong. So therefore, it's not possible to have an algorithm that's 100% fair. So figuring out what those challenges were in different regions and balancing that. And the number one lesson that I came away with from that is that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. It's very easy when we're doing work to try to build for different regions to just want to pick people who represent that symbolically or have proxy representations of that. So myself, I'm Black, I'm Latina, I'm a military veteran, I'm also queer, but I don't fully represent any of those communities. So just happening to pull me into a discussion doesn't mean that you now understand the queer perspective because there's infinite variation in that. And so more participatory design, actually going to those regions and listening to the users about what they do and don't want is not only good from a moral sense, it's actually good for business. So for example, there was a researcher named Nithya at Google. She used to work in the Next Billion User unit, who had done a 6-week immersive privacy study in India to understand what privacy needs were in the region. And what she found is that over 50% of the women that were in the region she was studying shared a smartphone with their husband. And so our entire notion of privacy in the US and the way Google was drafting its rules and laws was based on the assumption that everyone had their own device. And that's simply not how it works in places that are not where we're from. And so that's why Android ended up creating the complete separate profiles in the same device, which then ended up being used in the more developed regions of the world, which ended up scaling the adoption of Android. And so again, going and listening within those communities will help you create features that will help you more deeply penetrate those markets, but that also have use back here in your primary or more, what do they call them? In more developed regions as well to drive revenue even deeper. So outside of it being good for DEI, being good for moral reasons, it's actually really, really good for business, if not critical and imperative for you to be able to scale your AI systems across different regions.
We're going to have to get more
Can I add
questions.
one
So
thing?
yeah, real brief.
Okay, so one thing that I do want to add to that too is these active inference agents, it's going to be humans that are imbuing their knowledge into these agents from their frame of reference all over the world. So people in Africa are going to be building agents that are knowledgeable about their issues and what they face and their culture. And this actually preserves the diversity of culture. Right now with deep learning, the biggest problem is how do we get rid of bias? How do we do this? And Gabriel Rene, who's the CEO of Versus in Davos, he was like, what you get with that is the average ethics in a blender, and that's never going to work worldwide. So this system actually preserves the diversity of knowledge so that the knowledge can grow just like human knowledge. And these agents will push back on each other just like humans do. And there will be consensus of right and wrong, but there will also be a preservation of the differences of beliefs and cultures. And, these voices will be preserved. And, and then the sharing of the knowledge is going to allow all of that to grow just like human knowledge.
Okay, I have a question. It's also pretty broad, actually, because this conversation is so great and wide-ranging. What does the future of ownership of property, shares, and copyright look like?
Any JDs on the panel?
Photographer probably has
Closest thing we have
idea
to
of what-
to a lawyer on the panel. So you're,
Right,
with the
copyright law
prompt.
now. Well, how should it all play out?
Copyright.
Here's the
Intellectual
prompt.
property.
Okay, you're an AI that's playing a lawyer. No, go.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was just wondering what the future of ownership looks like in the context of property, owner like shares and copyright as well.
If I sell you a costume in a new kind of metaverse, at my little shack in the metaverse, like a new kind of Burning Man, who owns the costume?
I can speak for at least the digital content space, right? Not as to who owns what, but some of the conversations that are happening. Intellectual property, and I spoke earlier a little bit about the content authenticity initiative, but initiatives like that, right? Efforts that are being put into place to give artists credit. When it comes to laws and intellectual property, and you spoke about stock as well. That's a little bit beyond that, but I think we do need to invest more in those systems and actually embed them into the systems and the software that we use in order to be able to track where they've come from, where they're going, and use the point at.
It gets really messy. I'm using an app called Cup of Soup, which I scan my face, and now my AI is going and doing all sorts of weird shit and sends me a picture of my AI doing things like going to Coachella in some sort of weird costume, which is sort of fun. I did. I gave it all the permission. There, no, it's cool. But this is who owns this content? It's content created by a computer with my picture. Okay, I own my picture, but it took my picture and wrapped it around a face of a thing that's going to Coachella.
So Robert, you didn't read the click-through agreement?
Oh, I know. I give away all my data. I actually, if you want my data, I'll give it to you. I'm one of those
I don't have
people.
the storage for your data.
You want all my Twitter data? I give it to you. There's 3 fine-tuned models of me out there because I give some entrepreneurs some data so they could create virtual Scobles.
I like
which is
it. We can live in all the metaverses.
A new problem is going to have. Oh, what do you mean? There's 100,000 Scobles walking around the world.
but at least you're using an app too. Nowadays, this is different, but it's similar in the sense that actors and actresses are even finding that even YouTubers are finding their content being leveraged by companies and ads without their consent, right? It's already happening. So I think it's a broader conversation.
They stole all my data to make the model.
100%.
All my blogs for a decade to make the model. So I'm embedded in that model. I can't be pulling myself out of it at this point.
And so for current copyright law, the way that the systems have started to decide is that if something is generated by an AI, it cannot be copyrighted by anybody because it wasn't created by a human. However, if you take that asset and then you regenerate it as a human, so let's say you use Udio to generate a sound, and you recreate that sound as a human, like using actual drum machines, then you can like copyright that piece. But their general rule of thumb is anything that is generated by an AI cannot be copyrighted by anyone. Now, the challenge about the data piece goes into the data collection practices before the US had any type of privacy laws, where Flickr used to be very popular to be scraped to grab images of people to create computer vision algorithms that powered some of Google's biggest systems internally, right? Where they just grabbed people's pictures without their permission. And so that comes back to, what the future of it is depends on what we collectively decide. Right now, OpenAI is in a number of lawsuits against authors who say, how did you and why did you take my book and put it inside of your algorithm that you're now selling to people to create things in my likeness? And then OpenAI is arguing, well, it's like going to a museum and seeing a painting, even though it's nothing like that. And so the future of how this stuff pans out, again, is up to us collectively to decide. Do we want it to be okay for you to take your original art, whether it's a photograph, whether it's a piece of text, and then any commercial company can take that, put it into their system, and make money off of it? And right now, there's a use case going on with Instagram where they just announced that they are going to use all of your content posted on Instagram to train new AIs. And in the US, we don't have an opt-out procedure. So if you want to opt out in the US, you have to go fill out a form, explain to them why you think they should let you opt out, and they can deny it. So I had a friend who's a big artist, was posting pictures of his art, and he went and it was like, please don't do it. And they wrote back and literally told him, well, we can't find any examples of making our AI generate your art, so we're going to keep your stuff inside of our training corpus. And so again, it comes back down to what rules, what guidelines we put in place to be able to make this stuff happen. And those decisions are being made right now. So the future is whatever we choose.
Okay. Yeah. Good answers, everyone. Next question.
Yeah, thank you guys. You guys are doing amazing. I kind of had a question related to kind of what Talbert was saying earlier when you were saying that you give your entire data to Netflix to get, the best recommendations because it's annoying. And I get that. I mean, right now we're using Google because it's free. We give all our data to Google. They serve us a bunch of ads, and we don't really care because it's convenient. But that can cause a lot of issues in the future. And it's not just because you're giving it to Netflix, but it's because Netflix will then take that data and then sell it. And then someone else can take that data and use it maliciously. Like, for example, I don't know if I should name drop, but like BetterHelp, for example, had been under a lot of litany because they essentially took data that's supposed to be protected and gave it to advertisers, allegedly. And essentially those people, use that basically, like, for example, who are having drinking problems, they were served alcohol ads and things like that. And so that's not necessarily good, right? And so given that sort of take, like, where do you think would be the best way to make sure that doesn't happen in this AI landscape? I mean, like, personally, the way I see it, the only way I see right now for my personal use case is using like local models, running open source models on my own machine or something like that. And anyone can answer this. It's just based off of what Talbert was saying.
No,
earlier.
I have actually a simple answer to that. I just think companies just need to be more transparent in what they're doing. I think if the transparency is there, like, oh, you're really just using my data just to give me better recommendations, and they actually are living up to what they're saying, then yeah, I'm completely open to that. But the things that you're talking about with BetterHelp, all those kind of use cases, that's why I think it's very important to have people who actually protect us and know those things, like the privacy, the security, all those things. I still think that's very important, but I'm saying more into the terms of just like if people were good and the companies were good. But we know that they're not really. But yeah, transparency.
Transparency only works if the companies don't claim it as IP, right? And so having been at Google and Microsoft, they have no impetus, no forcing function, because as a C corporation, everyone who is a director level or above, or some like L6 people managers and above, have fiduciary duty, which means that they have a legal and personal liability to do everything that they can to make the company money. So doing things that will protect privacy only become money driving activities when you have things like regulations that will hit you with massive fines if you don't comply with them. That's where like GDPR comes in, right? So there was some use cases when we had the skin tone team where they were really powerful use cases, and the legal teams were like, absolutely not, because that could be inferred as a GDPR violation, and I'm not signing off on a potential $6 billion fine. And so the way that we can protect that here is by implementing data protection regulations. And being in California, California has the CCDPA, the California Data Privacy and Protection Act, which is like the GDPR of the US, even though it's not scaled across the federal government, which allows people to know exactly what data is collected. There's different opt-in and opt-out procedures. You can request all data gathered about you be permanently deleted. And so like having those boundaries in place creates the impetus or the forcing function for the company to care. The other piece that we're missing, I think, in the US is the enforcement arm. So right now the FTC is kind of playing that with algorithm creators and data providers. However, we find that they're not listening. So Amazon, for example, just got slapped with a $25 million fine because it was keeping copies of children's voice data even after the parents had requested it had been deleted and they told them that. And the fine is only 25 million. So it's like, is that a real incentive to stop versus 6% of your revenue, which is what GDPR has? And so if we leave it up to the way things are flowing now, the companies are going to keep lobbying. It's too complicated. Don't regulate us. China, we're not going to compete. It's going to slow down innovation. We're just going to leave all of us vulnerable versus we have to, I think, as, citizens or residents or just people who care about what the world looks like in the future have to play a more active role in shaping what those boundaries are instead of leaving it up to the people who are benefiting from it not having boundaries.
And again,
There's a mic, almost a mic drop.
this new era, this next era of our internet, one of the beautiful things though is that permissions are very nuanced, right? Right now we're living in a state of like yes or no for access to data, all data, and then like you said, it's really hard to pull that access back, and then you've lost it. But with the Spatial Web Protocol, not only are you going to be able to have nuanced, permissions on what kinds of data. You have time as a factor because you're talking about a spatial realm that takes into account computing things over time. So you can put, expirations on the permissions as well. And that's going to make a big difference. You'll be able to go to the doctor and say, you can have access to this amount of data and you can put an expiration on it. So it doesn't just stay in their system.
What a world. We're going to be walking through shopping malls, talking to restaurants, and our data is going to be negotiated to give to the restaurant to make a menu better for us or whatever, right? It might only be a little bit of data, but that's going to happen constantly as we're moving around the world talking with our AIs.
Well, yeah, I mean, to the extent that we allow it. Which is what you're saying. Yeah, no, exactly.
My robot's going to have all my data. His robot's going to have all his data. Not yours.
but also, too, that restaurant will have that data in that moment, but won't have all your data, and that's a big difference.
So again, it goes back to what's the use case. I would love to go to a restaurant. Like earlier today, I went to a Mediterranean spot and I had to like ask for some extra olives and some extra sauce because it just wasn't to my taste buds. So for those kinds of use cases, absolutely. But like going into, like a Target or something like that, and it's seeing my shopping history across everything and my browsing history in order to recommend what products I need becomes dangerous. And we've seen this already where Microsoft had created an algorithm, I think 2014 or 2016, that could predict whether or not a person was pregnant based on their browsing history, based on their shopping history. And they got a teenage girl in trouble because it was sending her ads for like baby stuff and her parents didn't know that she was pregnant. And so we have to again think not just about the benefits and the convenience, but the potential for those systems to be abused, as well as what happens when someone breaks into their systems. We just had Live Nation get hacked where 500 million people's name, addresses, credit cards, phone numbers, all their PII is for sale right now on the dark web and they don't get in trouble. Right? Santander just had a hack literally yesterday, and there's hundreds of millions of people's data out there. You have these platforms that if I give you my data, there needs to be repercussions if you lose it or if a bad actor gains access to it, which unfortunately in the US there really isn't right now. And so I think to help make that a little bit more trustworthy is to make sure that we have rules like, hey, Bank of America, or hey, Chase, or hey, Live Nation, if my PII ends up on the internet because you didn't secure your systems or you had bad actors inside your company to where someone I don't want having my food preferences or my health data gets access to it, then you should pay for it, which will then incentivize them to protect that data more. Unfortunately, in this society, these companies, they'll do what's good for money and they really only care about caring when it's good for money.
Yeah, yeah. And yes, I agree completely with that. But at the same time, and just to play a little bit of a devil's advocate as well. Um,
Whose AI agent is going to
Wait,
win?
can somebody go out there and get a couple cases of beer and bring it in here?
no. I think everything you're saying makes sense right now, and as I'm hearing it, but I'd like to. It's also a slippery slope, right? And what if when it does get convenient, when we're tired, and when like we're you know what I'm saying? Like it it makes sense right now, but it's almost like a toxic relationship if I were to draw that parallel, right? You give it one thing and then it gives you something in return. It feels good. You want to give it more, right? It is that kind of relationship that we are going to develop with our AI, and we might become hypocritical with that and not follow through with what is logical.
We're giving it all to it.
Yeah.
And make sure
We just want to make sure that us giving it to them is consensual, first and foremost. And that sounded really horrible. But Jesus. But we want it to be consensual, meaning that I'm giving you permission to do that. And two, to make sure that if I'm doing that with sensitive data about my reality, like let's just take genomics data, right? Like I would love for gene therapy to tell me how to heal my injuries from Afghanistan longer term so that, I as a military veteran have a longer life. And I'm happy to give my DNA data away. But 23andMe took that data and sold it to a bunch of pharmaceutical companies who are now basically using it to make designer drugs. Then they got hacked. Now there's a whole bunch of people's genomic data with your name, your birth date, exactly who you are out on the dark web where someone can take it and make a designer drug just to affect you. And so again, if them finding what I do and don't watch on Netflix, my whole recommendation history, everything I've ever watched on the internet, I don't really care. You can't really harm me with that. But with those different classes of data, my financial data, my health data, my physical data, my private data, like my mental state, or like me talking about my toxic ex, like I don't want that to be gathered by a bad actor in a way that could manipulate me. So when that kind of data is collected and stored, there needs to be boundaries and guardrails. Like if you lose this data, you are going to pay a massive fine to incentivize them to better secure their systems as well as to hold them accountable when they fail to do so.
That's well said. At the same time, there's always going to be edge cases that gets media attention, right? Like, it's not even AI, but remember when like Samuel L. Jackson, when like liking stuff on Twitter and it was X-rated and people found out what he was looking at? Like, there are some people, yeah, but like, there are some people who probably don't want people to find out what they're being recommended on Netflix, right? And there are always going to be edge cases, and it's going to be a messy, messy world.
Do we want to continue? Because we could do this all night long. In fact,
are you saying you want to do this all night long, or you're saying
on X.com, we do Twitter Space audiences like this, and we literally go all night long. So,
well, here we have somebody's been waiting for a long time to ask a question, so maybe this was the last question, maybe not. I'm open to keep going.
All right, 2 questions.
One and a half.
Are you bribing me with beers? Well, where's my beer?
Where's our beer?
You came in with beer. Everybody's got a beer. But who wants a beer? And we're not gonna, you have to raise your hand if you want a beer. Just beer. There might be like a hot. What is the like a seltzer, alcoholic seltzer or something.
Can you hear me? So, in this rush to get everybody connected and giving personalized recommendations and all, I feel what is happening is society as a general is starting to disintegrate into silos. So it's getting hard at home to even find a movie that all can agree to go or even watch at home. The kids don't talk to you. Your wife doesn't want to talk to you. You don't want to talk to your wife. The reason is you sit with your mobile and your stuff is being pushed on to you. You do not find any other different things. It's the dopamine hits are again and again and again. What is happening in Japan is basically there are 10 million houses which are vacant. People are in old age homes and there are robots visiting them with nurses. I go to Kaiser quite a lot. I mean, quite a lot means last 10 years for some medical reasons. And what I noticed over there is very depressed old people sitting around there, nobody talking to them. And the same thing is when you see even in the hospital settings also. We are becoming a disconnected society. And what is happening is the virtual world is our world is becoming virtual. There are now dating sites where they tell people how to talk for young adults, which never was the case. And this, in my belief, is a serious problem which has been aggravated by technology.
I have, I have an AI in my ear talking to me and telling me what questions to ask. That's going to be a true statement in just a year, right? There's a lot of companies building exactly that, and it works pretty good to tell me what to do on a panel or in a work situation or a dating situation or even with my friends. I pull out Chat GPT with my friends. I ask consent. But they always do. Oh yes, go ahead and start up the Chat GPT, and we talk about whatever topic, if it's nuclear power or something like that. And Chat GPT it gets involved. It's another person at the table almost.
Yeah, I'd like to say it's also like a question mark, like yes and no. And be curious what you think about this as well. But I think with like stuff like the Vision Pro, and it removes, that element of like having to stare at a piece of hardware, right? And like if you're wearing technology and it's allowing you to also see what's around you, maybe that'll bring back a bit of that interaction that we're missing, right, in our households. So
You're dressed up as SpongeBob right now.
Or if someone does it bad, they're going to do an AI
it's really whatever you want to
AI generated civilization, right?
I think to your point, yeah, that's exactly where we're heading. I think that even with the whole thing that happened with COVID and people are working from home, a lot of the older generation, growing up, always going into the office, they're like, oh, I'm going to work from home forever. Now I'm like entering into this new workforce and like I'm working at Intel right now. I'm going to Intel and no one's there. I'm like, but all the other interns and all the other people who are working that are younger are there because we seek more connection. We know that there's an issue, there's a problem going on with like not being able to connect with people. So I think that this new wave of people coming up are going to kind of bring everything back together. You don't want iPad kids. Like it's going to just be, I think, more connection coming forward.
It's a great technology in our lives, and dating apps are even decreasing in terms of population.
My friends and I have the Vision Pro, and I do 4-hour stints with him on FaceTime, just keeping him up like right here while I'm working. And he's sort of there, and I'm that to him, and then we can decide what music to listen to together or apart. Right? There's a lot of new connections that are going to happen as well because of this technology, but it is a big problem.
Also, this technology is going to evolve to a space where we're able to be in these experience environments with other people. And even though it's a virtual experience, it's going to feel real. It's going to feel like a real experience. And, they've done studies on people who are in VR experiences, and their brain is logging it as a memory as if it was real. There's no difference in how it's affecting the brain. So I think that just when I say, the way we live and breathe as humans is about to change, that's kind of what I'm talking about is, we're humans. We crave interaction. We crave human connection, but we're going to have this whole new way to experience it.
So to add on to that, the human brain and the way that it works anyway is that when you're watching a movie or experiencing something in your life, your brain can't tell the difference between that either. right? It receives it as if it's real. So if you're one of those people that binge watches horror movies and you don't get scared anymore, it's because you literally desensitize your fight or flight response in your actual brain. So whether that's in a VR environment or, doom scrolling through TikTok, your body can't perceive, your brain can't perceive the difference between if it's actually happening in real life or not, just with, motion pictures and sensory input. The other piece of that is that, to your point, as we're moving into this new world, with any bad, there's always going to be good, right? So as we take that disconnection piece away, my grandmother, my grandfather was a Vietnam veteran, and when he went away to the war, she just had to sit around waiting, hoping to God that someone didn't show up at her door one day. All his letters got lost, so she just sat there waiting for him to come. And so when I went to Afghanistan in 2012, I was able to pull open this device, open a little app called Skype, and physically see my grandmother in real time so that she would know that I was okay, right? And so this technology allowed us to foster a different kind of connection. And before she passed away, God rest her soul, I had a Facebook portal in her house. And so then we were able to video call all the time and talk and see each other across those distances. So I do believe that there is a level of harm that these systems do create. It's definitely unintended, and it's because the people who design these systems are, one, driven by profit legally, and two, because they design them in a silo. They say, this would be really cool to have a better media recommendation system, and don't zoom out and look at that in the context of the addictive scrolling social media app or the other communication apps. And so that's where policy plays a role, right? Where there's a responsibility to zoom out of a particular dope industry or use case and say, how is this affecting us? So Europe has a great example of a policy and a regulation that can do this. It's called the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, and the DSA, the Digital Services Act, which requires that any new feature in a platform that's going to touch more than 30 million people across the EU has to submit a risk assessment. And the risk assessment has to look for things like the potential harm to youth, the potential harm to a user's mental health, etc. And so they require the companies to think about these things and produce those reports. TikTok had a version of their app, I forget what it was called. It was like Click and Earn or Share and Collect or something like that they launched in Europe, specifically in France. And the app was for people who were 18 and over, and you could go in and as you liked and you would share and you'd engage, they'd give you points. And then you could take those points and turn them into real world, like an Amazon gift card. Basically, they were paying you to use the platform. Well, 2 months ago, they launched, and then Europe goes, hold on, bro, where's the risk assessment? And then they said, you got a week to give us the risk assessment. And TikTok didn't respond at all. So they responded again and said, we're going to investigate you for a violation of the DMA and the DSA, which again is like a violation is like 6% of your revenue in that region, right? And so TikTok was like, oops, our bad, just kidding. And then they took the app out of the app store. And so I think, again, if we have policy levers that don't say don't build the thing, but say, hey, if you're going to build it, before you turn it on, demonstrate to us that you've critically thought about this. Demonstrate to us that you've zoomed out about how this is going to be so cool because you're going to put money in people's pockets. And take a second and think about how could this negatively impact users' mental health, and what are you going to do to put guardrails around that, right? And so regulation is not and should not be intended to block things from happening, but to force a better way of doing business collectively so that we're not continuously harmed by the way that some of these social media technologies have been rolled out in silos.
A lot of the Black Mirror scenarios.
Well, a lot of the Black Mirror stuff is already real. you guys just haven't worked in cleared environments like the government. Like a lot of that stuff is way real.
It's true. I think that was a great place to end up. Thank you so much for a great conference. I've been watching both of the days. Yeah.
Okay, we gotta pay the toll. I have to disclose, I think you wired for sound, so let us know what that's about real quick.
So if it's okay, I'm also recording this question and answer. If
That's
not,
fine.
we're fine. Yeah, we'll take it off. Okay. So since Steven is pressuring me so much, I have to run this with perplexity. So make sure I have my question up briefly. So do you think that big tech companies like Facebook, Microsoft actually want more data privacy rules and regulation that could make it harder for smaller companies and startups to enter and compete in the market? Like especially in healthcare, like a lot of laws and regulations and big companies like Microsoft, Facebook, those are the ones that would have the resources, for all of the hire lawyers and all of that. So for them to break through the market, would it come into like the conglomerate, side of things? If you feel like it pressed more on laws and regulation and data privacy.
It's regulatory capture. Are the big companies going to do regulatory capture that the small company can't? Yes. Microsoft, when I worked there, had 803 lawyers. A small startup doesn't have that kind of resources to deal with the changing laws and regulations around the world.
I just add that sometimes that's a benefit to the startups because they don't have to comply or they can take those risks. If they're under 30 million in the EU or other places, but we can have a long conversation about that. I know we want to wrap it up, so let's just go down the line and give a quick answer.
So I think it depends on what the regulation is, right? So, we've both been at Microsoft, and Microsoft Azure as a cloud platform is compliant with just about every regulation across every industry. So if you're trying to build something in healthcare, you have to comply with HIPAA. Then, like, if you build on Microsoft Azure in a particular way, not only is it guaranteed that your app is going to be HIPAA compliant, but they'll sign a BAA with you to take up to $2 billion of a hit if it's not, right? And so we look at Microsoft on one end, but then we also have to look at Microsoft as a service provider and what offerings they provide to make it easier for small businesses to comply, because that's also good for their business. It will drive more cloud consumption versus, Google Cloud Platform or AWS. And so I think one of the challenges is that I have seen personally, I worked at one point in Google, my skip manager was the chief legal officer. I've seen personally how that narrative has been used to create or try to dissuade privacy laws from being passed that would force the company to be more ethical, which means slow down, which means maybe make a little bit less profit to comply themselves, because the laws that were being proposed, they were already violating, right? And they didn't want to have to go back and change anything, because again, their whole function is to go make money. So if you're going to propose something that's going to slow me down from making money, I'm going to make any argument that I can to try to stop it, and then put a whole campaign out to AstroTurf. And so something that I like about Europe in there, they have what they call the European data strategy or something like that, is that they talk about how to implement these regulations in a way that incentivize companies to contribute data, to contribute technology and knowledge back to a collective pool that is then made available to startups and to researchers. And whether those are tax incentives, whether those are legal requirements, like, hey, if you are collecting data out of a car because your car has produced a ton of data, then you have to make that anonymized and then put it in a collected data pool that anyone who's a startup in this country wants to build be able to use it. So I think it just depends on how we balance it. I think that there are platforms out there that build the regulatory compliance in to make it easier for companies, but I do know that companies go way over to try to not get things passed using that kind of narrative as well.
Yeah. So I think that we need to pull back a little bit when we're looking at these big tech companies that are in power right now, because they came to power through the World Wide Web, and they are centralized organizations that take advantage of all of the lack of security and everything within the spatial web. And even if you look at how far down they are in the deep learning rabbit hole, that's a centralized form of AI. That's like back when we had supercomputers before everybody had PCs and desktops, right? So I think we need to really reflect on the fact that everything we know about computing is about to change. And I think that we could possibly even see with some of these big tech companies, not all of them, but some of them, they may become the blockbusters that, they're built on this centralized structure, and they're going to hold so hard onto that because that's their business model. But we are evolving into a decentralized internet that is powered by AI, that is cheap for processing, because the processing is at the edge. So everything is about to change. And if they don't find a way to pivot, it won't matter, right?
Yeah, my answer is pretty short and sweet. It's just a lot of these companies that you even named, like Google, Facebook, and all of them are at face value, B2C, but a big portion of their profit, I mean, as they were saying, comes from companies using cloud services. I mean, Amazon, AWS. I mean, they that's kind of like the bread and butter of what they're going to do. So they're not going to do anything to hinder the small guys because that's where they make a lot of their money from. You know what I'm saying? So yeah.
Yeah, I want to address like a portion of what you were saying about like even taking out small companies who are building um, competitive tech. And I think it depends first off on the tech company and on the product line as well, because it can be advantageous to a bigger tech company as well to have an open ecosystem, right, in which companies can easily integrate into, and that's a win-win for both the smaller companies and the tech company itself. And that's something that I think would be advantageous to take into equation as well, and something that would be in favor of the tech company, right? So, and I think we have seen illustrations of this, again, depending on the use case, depending on the product line, but it's absolutely impossible to solve for every use case in the B2B or B2C space. And smaller companies are just, they have their ears to the ground, it's just impossible for tech companies to be able to solve all of that. So there's definitely a partnership there that makes sense, and that should be leaned into.
Yeah, well, I want to thank everybody on the panel. I want to, going down the line, Robert, X, Denise, Talbert, Eliza, everybody that stuck around. This was an amazing couple of days. Thank you, thank you. Okay, well, testimonials on Facebook and all the other socials, deeply appreciated.
I'm actually probably by the end of the summer. Do I have your number?